So if you haven't seen part 1 in this mini-series where we rank 250 TV pilots, the link will be in the description. If you're smart and you did your homework before watching this video, then yay, I'm glad you're back. Today we're going over numbers 200 to 151. If the previous video held all the bad, bottom-of-the-barrel worthy shows, this video is certainly an upgrade from that. I'd say most in this tier are okay. Not amazing by any means, but not stuff I would turn off with a passion. Lots of them are just kind of forgettable or unassuming, but I'd rather have that than something that's in the offensively awful category like we saw in part 1. With that said, let's dive right back into it with number 200, Hannibal. Lawrence Fishburne is great here and was the reason I continued watching, but I can't believe the amount of praise and acclaim this show gets. A lot of the horror elements to this series feel undercooked, and Hannibal Lecter himself is a bit underwhelming, I guess. I get that it's meant to be a slow burner, but I really would have preferred a little more bite with this one. Number 199, Friends from College. In filmography filing, I mentioned how this show has episodes that are extremely funny with a solid joke-a-minute pace behind them, and others, such as its pilot, that are completely void of creativity or energy and leave the viewers waiting for something notable to happen, which ultimately never comes. Number 198, That 80s Show. Okay, so hear me out. I know I'm working an uphill battle here, but I truly don't think this show is as bad as everyone makes it out to be. I mean, would I say it's as good as That 70s Show, or good for all that matter? Oh, dear Lord, absolutely fucking not. I mean, I'm aware just as much as everybody else that this show is way too reliant on the 80s as a setting, rather than That 70s Show, which feels like an everyman style show that just so happens to take place in the 70s. The difference is night and day. But I mean, the Asian dude was pretty funny. I think part of why everyone hates this show is due to the ridiculously high bar that 70s Show set for itself. It's the same reason why How I Met Your Father was very disappointing to so many, is because people had a false expectation based on what those previous shows had set for themselves, and these spin-offs that were, I suppose, meant to be their own separate thing. Hard to see it that way, I know, but looking at it isolated from That 70s Show, giving it a blank slate, it's not awesome, but the expectations blind people from seeing this show for what it actually is, a teen sitcom trying its best. Number 197, Full House. Before we go any further, rest in peace Bob Saget. Now that the pleasantries have been taken care of, the success of this show has always puzzled me. The leads have some good chemistry here, but it's just not that funny. And the whole guy doesn't know how to take care of a baby trope is stale as the box of Honey Nut Cheerios I found in our basement last week. Number 196, Young Sheldon. The Big Bang Theory worked because it was a true ensemble with every character filling a specific niche or personality type. Young Sheldon, on the other hand, is pure Sheldon with little to no variation. And while some shows are so bad you ask the question, who thought this would work? I totally understand why CBS is so confident in this show and why it was such a massive ratings draw. But as for having a good story or interesting dialogue, yeah, that's definitely lacking here. I like Sheldon just as much as the next guy, but a prequel series sounds way better on paper than it works in execution. Number 195, MASH. Forgettable as Fairweather Johnson. What's Fairweather Johnson exactly? You don't know, I don't know, nobody fucking knows because nobody fucking remembers. And that's how MASH's pilot makes me feel. Number 194, Mercy Street. So I dissected this one already on my podcast, but in short, the historical elements clash with the medical elements to make for a disjointed, albeit creative, drama that's trying way too hard. Not to mention, this happens. Number 193, Community. Every time I'm reminded of this show, I can't help but laugh in disbelief that John Oliver was on this one, and now he's talking about politics in a more professional and collected way than actual politicians. It'd be like if that dumb cuck who played Kevin started a fucking podcast called Brian Bumgarner's Biden Bashing or some shit. Number 192, The Cleaning Lady. Yet another crime drama. Yippee. I mean, this one isn't awful, I guess, but this feels like it was mismarketed and like it would have done way better somewhere else, you know? Fox wasn't exactly the best fit for this show, and it definitely shows due to the outcome feeling like it had to play it safe for network TV. You guys know I'll die on the hill for broadcast TV like Fox, but sometimes the restrictions get in the way, and The Cleaning Lady feels like it suffered pretty severely due to said restrictions. Number 191, Rick and Morty. What the fuck did they put in that Szechuan sauce to make you motherfuckers act like this is the second coming of Jesus? Number 190, The Office. Alright, so let's get one thing out of the way. I don't hate The Office, like many people will believe I do. And while I wouldn't blame you for assuming that, I've made it absolutely clear that I respect the hell out of this little show that could. From the fact that it was a near word-for-word remake of the original, from the fact that the original show is god-awful, from it being in a genre that back in 2005 was still pretty experimental, this had all the makings for a show that should have crashed and burned mere episodes into its run. And yet somehow it became the 8th greatest TV show of all time according to my top 100 list. That being said, this is the pilot episode, and all of those elements are loud and clear present here. Many people would agree in saying that the first season as a whole is pretty rough. And there's no question that this first episode suffers from many of those same reasons, whether you're a diehard fan of The Office or not. Number 189, Sons of Anarchy. Mike, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, man. Mike recently put out a list on his channel giving his top 10 favorite TV pilots, and of the 10 he included, 3 of them also land in my top 10, 8 of them crack the top 50, and all but 1 are in the top 100. Based on that, it's not hard to figure out which one I wasn't huge on. I wouldn't call Sons of Anarchy bad per se, but it certainly wasn't what I expected. It really blurs the line in trying to be serious and being full-on melodramatic, but it doesn't stick to one, and instead chooses to swerve in and out of those lanes and not willing to commit. I also wanted more action. After all, this is an action show, and not a family drama about a junkie who refuses to get help. I think Mayans MC was much stronger in that regard, which I preferred over this one quite a bit. Ron Perlman got a few chuckles out of me, but as I've stated many times before, crime dramas as a whole just aren't really my thing as compared to most people, and at the end of the day, I just felt underwhelmed based on everything I'd heard about the show going into it. Number 188, The Cosby Show. Alright, I'm gonna rip the band-aid off quick here. This show wasn't that good. Not like it was reported to be, at least. And looking at it from an unbiased, separating the art from the artist sort of way, The Cosby Show is a thin veil of a storyline placed over moments where Bill Cosby gets to be Bill Cosby, for better or for worse. Like I talked about in part 1 with the Jamie Foxx show, these self-titled sitcoms often find themselves stuck in that one person is trying way too hard and everyone else isn't trying hard enough. And while I think this is a little bit more balanced here than in Jamie Foxx's case, Bill Cosby at the end of the day is still targeting a different demo than I belong to. And by that I mean really wealthy people, and the so-called problems they face day to day. This show reeks of the 1980s conservatism movement, and it's a product of its time in the worst way possible. Number 187, Good Sam. Super disappointing considering the talent in both Sophia Bush and Jason Isaacs. The huge red flag with this show is the script, which is so cliche, you'd have thought an AI wrote it. Number 186, Grey's Anatomy. Slightly better, but even still pretty bleh overall. Patrick Dempsey and Sandra Oh are fantastic, but Katherine Heigl and Chandra Wilson aren't. It just kind of balances itself out to be just whatever, I guess. Number 185, Hill Street Blues. So I was having a conversation with my dad about this episode not long ago, and even he, a longtime fan of this show that he'd rank in his top 5 favorites period, would agree that this first episode is pretty rough around the edges. The whole first season is like that, in fact, and this was reflective in the ratings as Hill Street Blues ranked at 87 in the year-end list for 1981. Director Robert Butler puts you in the middle of the action from the get-go, and while you think that sounds awesome, it's a bit much to take in all at once. It's gritty and raw and visceral and a bit hard to follow, ultimately making you feel like you're missing out on something because everybody is talking at once and the whole precinct's buzzing. According to most, including Dad, this show got progressively better in its second season, and again, this was reflective in the ratings, jumping from 87 to 28, making it a show that you'll definitely want to check out at some point, but admittedly having to waive the first season to get to the good parts. Number 184, Grounded for Life. Like The Honeymooners, the most clever part about this episode is in the title. Lily be good? How about the episode tries to be good next time, huh? Number 183, Battlestar Galactica. The cool ending of this episode wasn't worth the wasted 38 minutes to get there. Number 182, King of the Hill. Mike Judge is a great writer, and I do feel like even from the beginning, it was easy to see why King of the Hill was a smash hit, even if I'm not big on it myself. Slice of life is hard to do, as we've talked about previously with shows like Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, and King of the Hill unfortunately suffers for many of the same reasons as those episodes, in that it's a little too realistic. Also, child abuse doesn't exactly make for a funny topic, in my opinion. Number 181, Moesha. Brandy is awesome. She's a talented singer and actor with another show of hers on this list quite high up. But like I just talked about The Cosby Show and The Jamie Foxx Show, this falls in the category of title character gets all the screen time and all the best parts and is trying a little too hard to make the show work, but everybody else is just kind of sleepwalking their way through this one, you know? And you wouldn't know that given everyone else's talents, but this pilot isn't exactly helping their case and saying that they're actually talented. Number 180, Just Shoot Me. Just Shoot Me is right. Between David Spade and George Segal, there isn't much energy here considering their massive status as TV actors, and the whole thing just feels slow and plodding. Number 179, Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. If it wasn't for Deadpool, I wouldn't give this one a passing glance. Number 178, The Nanny. Franz Drescher is awesome, and this show certainly got stronger as it went on, but this didn't really have enough meat on the bone to where it was enough for a full meal, and the day I happened to watch this one, I was pretty hungry, and I hope this metaphor makes sense because I'm not repeating it. Number 177, Home Improvement. Watching Tim Allen's dishwasher explode is fucking hilarious, but that's really the only part we're seeing. Number 176, Smart Guy. This is the black equivalent of Young Sheldon. And there's honestly not that much difference between these two, except for the fact that, okay, alright, no, I'm just joking, that does not happen here, but I gotta say that would be pretty funny. A 10-year-old just dropping the N-bomb in class to try to fit in with the big kids, there's some potential there. But in all seriousness, outside of the sweet ending that he has with his brother here, this episode just overall is pretty forgettable. Number 175, News Radio. Pretty unmemorable and dull. The 90s were home to so many better sitcoms, it's hard to justify giving any time to this one. Number 174, Scrubs. Me and Matt both agree that season 1 of Scrubs is the best season of the show, at least based on what we've seen, but that's not really saying much considering the fact that this is the best episode of the show, at least in my opinion, and it's still bubbling on being the bottom of the barrel level quality. Number 173, Friends. The one where Monica gets a roommate? More like the one that puts my ass to sleep. 172, All in the Family. Did you know that Carol O'Connor was the original choice to play the skipper on Gilligan's Island? I thought that was pretty interesting considering how different of a character that is compared to the world-famous Archie Bunker. And without question, O'Connor's performance here is undeniable, though judging from the placement, you know what's coming next. Everyone else feels underdeveloped or isn't very well thought out. And while they don't say that word, they say just about everything else. Number 171, Duncanville. I swear they must have mixed up the list of all the names of the voice cast with this show for an Emmy envelope. Ty Burrell, Amy Poehler, Rashida Jones, fucking Wiz Khalifa. But ultimately, the material given here is just not that strong. This is a show I appreciate more than one I'd recommend to y'all to check out, as I think for the most part, it comes off a little more unconfident than most other adult cartoons out there at the moment. Number 170, Taxi. Andy Kaufman as Latka is fucking brilliant, but that's really the only interesting part of this episode, which for a sitcom is much darker and emotional than I would have preferred. But I understand why this is popular because people like the emotional tug that shows like Taxi offer. If it's labeled as a sitcom though, I expect more laughs than cries, and unfortunately the ratio here is backwards for it to be effective. Number 169, Black AF. A great idea that is botched in execution, Black AF is a mockumentary starring Kenya Barris and Rashida Jones, talking about their lives as Black Americans. And although I like that basic premise just fine, after watching it, it's clear that Barris, creator of the sitcom Blackish, is a one-trick pony. This show feels a lot more profound and cultured than it is in actuality, and that's made hella obvious by its fucking episode titles, which is just the same dumb joke told 8 times over. I see what they were going for here, but I can't help but feel like this was a bit of a wake-up call for Barris, who is very talented, but needs to expand off of slavery bad, lol. Number 168, The Handmaid's Tale. My parents, and seemingly everyone else on this planet, fucking loves this show. And I understand why, I guess. Well, actually I don't, to be honest, but I mean I do, but I really don't at the same time. I get why this dark, dystopian, desolate type of story that's meant to be an allegory for the massive influence Trump's America had on the public. Geez, that fuck influenced a fuck ton of shows, huh? Is an important story to tell. And on a technical level, Elizabeth Moss is outstanding in this role. But as stated so many times before, TV and these videos as a whole are an outlet for me to put my frustrations or stresses out in a healthy way. And the idea of watching something like this where people literally accept being raped as a normal part of life, yeah, I'm a pass, but you do you. Look, if this is what you like, that's cool with me, but shows like this remind me that as a 21-year-old, I'm still young, quote-unquote, in a way that doesn't fully understand why this is so appealing, but I'm glad people are enjoying it, even if it's something that I don't. Number 167, House. Hugh Laurie is fantastic here, and I'd certainly rather watch this as it's not as focused on the actual medical procedures as other hospital shows, which is my biggest critique of the genre. But the whole time I was watching, you get that sense that this show is awfully cocky, almost like it thinks it's better than everything else on TV, just because it's intentionally trying to be like an anti-medical show. But like, no, at the end of the day, you're still a medical show. Don't try to hide it, you know? Also, I have to point out, because it's me, that the fucking whiplash you get of seeing that cuck from Chicago Fire talk like Hugh Jackman is mind-blowing. Number 166, Criminal Minds. This is better than Hannibal, but it's still at the end of the day trying to do the same thing here, and it's just not really hitting for me personally. Number 165, Family Matters. So I feel bad for putting this one so low because I know that this show is way better than I'm giving it credit for, but this episode is one of the few that doesn't feature Steve Urkel. And I'm gonna be honest with y'all, had Urkel not been introduced, this would have probably gotten the axe after its first season, because all it was at the beginning was a pretty mediocre family sitcom without a lot of punch behind it, and bland characters that needed someone like Urkel to play off of. Without him, this just feels pretty empty and underwhelming. Number 164, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Debuting 4 years prior to The Twilight Zone, this is the series that technically deserves more of the credit for being influential and introducing the idea of an anthology series to the masses. but I don't think it's controversial to admit that I like The Twilight Zone far more, as I'll talk about in a future video. The way that Alfred Hitchcock literally presents the opening and closing of this episode is exactly how like Rod Serling does for The Twilight Zone. And it's clear that Hitchcock is much better suited to be behind the camera rather than in front of it, as it just feels a little awkward, you know? But even more, the story, called Revenge, is as boilerplate as they come. A man's wife is poisoned by a traveling salesman. The police and surrounding neighbors, one of whom is Aunt Bee, doesn't seem to know much. So the man takes matters into his own hands, tracking down the salesman and murdering him in his hotel room. There, I saved you 25 minutes. Look, this was probably very entertaining in 1955, but it's been nearly 70 years since then, and I'm sorry, I'd so much rather watch any other suspense or thriller or horror show over this, even a bad one, because this is predictable and slow and uninspired. On a technical level, the directing done by Hitchcock is of course amazing, and the acting is pretty solid, but I know y'all agree that this is definitely far from where we have TV now. The way that the medium has evolved over the years is way, way, way superior to what this episode is able to showcase. Number 163, The Golden Girls. Before we go any further, rest in peace Betty White, who is no question about it the best part of this show. I just wish that it was a little less cliche. Given the great cast here, the writing is unfortunately not to the same level and just comes off really predictable. Number 162, Downton Abbey. To be honest, it wasn't a complete train wreck like I thought, and the performances were actually pretty decent, I have to admit. But like, I opened the door on this show, and now my mom is trying to get me to watch The Gilded Age and trying her damnedest to do so. And like, I might grow into this genre, maybe, but it wasn't the best first impression after all. I mean, it's still ranked only 162, and the fan base goes a bit overboard with this at times. Like, yeah, it's okay, but it's not worth all the acclaim it's gotten over the years. God, no, it's not. Number 161, BoJack Horseman. I'm not here to tell you that adult animation can't be dramatic or dark or a tragedy, and that it has to always be a comedy. But if you're going to give this show all of its praise and awards and such, I think we need to do a strict reevaluation of Big Mouth and Hoops. Number 160, The X-Files. I'm going to chop this one up to the idea that sci-fi isn't my bag generally, because I don't have any harsh or obvious criticisms against this show, and I'd say compared to what we've talked about so far, I'd be more interested in seeing more of this, but I have a feeling this is another example of a show that had trouble finding its footing early on in its first couple of seasons, but once it did, this thing was unstoppable. Number 159, Mr. Pickles. I don't love gross-out humor all that much, but the way Matt talks about this show, you think it caused him to develop a fucking STD or something. Number 158, The Game. Now comparably, Matt acts like this show remedied his STD and rescued him from a life of embarrassment. Both this and Mr. Creep are fine. They're nothing special, very middle-of-the-road sitcoms in their respective genres that, you know, if you are part of that fan base, you will probably enjoy, but if you're not, they're not exactly something that you have to seek out after all. Number 157, The Cleveland Show. Is this one really one of the worst cartoons ever, like IMDb would have you believe? Well, no, IMDb is a bunch of racist a-holes and you shouldn't trust them. Okay, maybe they're not that bad, but neither is The Cleveland Show. It doesn't hit the same highs as American Dad or Family Guy by any means, but if Seth MacFarlane's style resonates with you, this one's going to be right up your alley. Number 156, True Detective. So clearly I'm not on the True Detective is the greatest thing since sliced bread bandwagon, but there are moments of brilliance here. Most notably, Nick Pizzolatto's writing. Absolutely outstanding dialogue in the show elevate Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey's performances, and the scenes where they're not doing much, just talking, are some of the best in the entire episode. like the car ride back from the first crime scene they visit. But the reason it's so low is simply how bloated this episode is. There's no reason this had to be a full hour long. Had they trimmed some of that fat, this could have been a fantastic 45-minute pilot to an amazing miniseries, but unfortunately there's just too much filler in this one, such as the fight with their coworkers and the dinner scene, that pad out the runtime and distract, rather than add anything unique or interesting to say. Number 155, Roseanne. Solid enough for what it is, but Roseanne always towed the line between a comedy and a drama, and again, as someone who generally watches TV to escape my own problems, being reminded of the harsh realities of life isn't exactly the most appealing concept to me, but unlike a lot of other shows that attempt it, Roseanne has plenty of strong jokes that offset the more grim atmosphere of the episode. Number 154, Grand Crew. If Smart Guy is a black Young Sheldon, Grand Crew is a black Friends, or How I Met Your Mother, or Will and Grace, or any other sitcom about a group of friends living in the big city, navigating their way through adulthood, relationships, and friendships. Needless to say, this was not necessary at all, and the unoriginality killed any momentum this show may have had from the get-go. Number 153, Mob City. You may be wondering how this obscure, middle-of-the-road drama that aired 6 episodes on TNT of all places popped up on my radar. Well, based on the amount of connections it had to The Walking Dead, how could I pass this one up? Jon Bernthal and Jeffrey DeMunn star in this show, and Frank Darabont, creator of The Walking Dead, also created this show. And while I was entertained by Mob City, I have zero interest in watching any more of it. I think this would have worked stronger as a movie given its noir style and flashy cinematography, not to mention the crime drama and period piece labels turn me off slightly from it. Oh, and before I forget, number 152, Game Shakers. I'll go to bat for this one as it seems like no one else is willing to. The basic premise of this show actually gave me a bit of hope that Dan Schneider actually can pull a good script out of his ass when he wants to. Of course, if he were to do that, there'd be brown smudges on it, and it probably wouldn't smell very good, but it'd be pretty funny. When Babe and Kenzie are paired for a school project together, they develop a video game called Skywhale, which becomes a smash hit, selling like crazy and putting them all over the news and doing interviews with big-name YouTubers like Pro Jared. Okay, I swear this show is good, just stick with me. In the game, the song they choose, called Drop That What, is that of a successful rapper named Double G, played by Kel Mitchell. Which, I mean, come on man, Kel fucking Mitchell. Ed from Good Burger. Tell me that isn't baller as hell. So when Double G realizes the girls used his song illegally, he threatens to sue them and shut down their recently formed video game company named Game Shakers. Double G's son, Triple G, played by actor and rapper Lil Peanut, and yes, all of those names are real. It's a fat white man trying to come up with rap names. They're cringy. I know, I understand, but just stick with me here. Double G's son, Triple G, however, forms a friendship with the girls and pleads his dad for him to work at the company instead of always touring and being on the road. Being the good dad that he is, Double G agrees to drop the suit and let his son work at Game Shakers, even investing some of his own money into the company, in part due to Skywhale giving his song tons of exposure. They throw a party to celebrate their newfound company and friendship. Double G performs Drop That What to a group of middle schoolers, and the credits roll. And I know, that seems super dumb, and listen, there are plenty of parts of the episode that are cringy, like I said before. This is late era Dan Schneider. I understand that this is not perfect by any means. But as a whole, I had fun with this, and had this come out alongside iCarly and Drake and Josh back in the day, I probably would have been all over this one. It's definitely not going to appeal to everybody, and that's totally fine, but I think it's worth giving a chance to, even if you're skeptical, just out of curiosity alone. And finally, number 151, Rules of Engagement. David Spade strikes again. But unlike Just Shoot Me, well, it's not exactly a strike, but at least 6 pins were knocked down here. The couples are well defined, everyone has good chemistry, and lots of familiar names fill up the cast here. The major issue is Tom Hanks' script, though, is Trope City. But even so, there's good performances here, and it gives you the solid idea of what to expect from the rest of the series. If you like this, chances are you'll like the rest of the show, and it'll probably become one of your new favorites. But if it's not for you, then don't sweat it. There's plenty of fantastic sitcoms out there, many of which we'll talk about next time as we go over ranks number 150 to 101 in part 3 of this series. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you then.